Everything had started in Las Vegas in 1958. At that time, Las Vegas was not yet the famous city we know today, filled with massive hotels, glowing signs, and millions of tourists. It was more of a developing place, still trying to make a name for itself. And right at that moment, the Hacienda Hotel, which served as both a hotel and a casino, wanted to get its name heard by far more people. But a simple advertisement would not be enough for that. They could not do some ordinary promotion like tying a banner to the tail of a plane and flying a few circles over the city. No, their idea was much, much crazier. They were going to write the hotel's name directly on an airplane, because a large banner tied to the tail of a plane could cause very serious aerodynamic problems during a long flight. And the flight they were planning was not going to be just a few hours of show. With this flight, they were going to equal the world record. At that time, the record for staying in the air was 47 days, so the pilot who would do this job did not only have to be a good pilot, he also had to be a little fearless, a little stubborn, and maybe even someone whose mind was not exactly too calm. And this is where Robert Timm, one of the pilots from World War II, came into the picture. But there was a problem. The place being advertised was not a restaurant or a family cafe, after all. It was a hotel and casino. So the advertisement also needed to receive support from the public. For this, a very clever method was found. The flight was announced as an event raising donations for cancer research. As part of the campaign, $100,000 were donated. This way, the hotel would advertise itself while also gaining sympathy in the eyes of society. In fact, this campaign was also remembered as one of the first major charity events organized for cancer research. The pilot had been found. The public relations side of the campaign had also been arranged. But now there was a much more important matter. Which airplane would be used for this flight? The 1950s were not bad years in terms of aircraft technology. On the contrary, aviation technology was developing rapidly. But for this mission, what was needed was not the newest or flashiest aircraft, but the most durable and practical one. Because the goal was simple, but incredibly difficult, the plane would stay in the air for days, even weeks, without landing. For this, the aircraft they chose had to be easy to fly, use very little fuel, be mechanically reliable, and reduce the risk as much as possible during aerial refueling. Robert Timm analyzed all these requirements and decided on one of the newer models of the time, the Cessna 172. But attempting a record like this with a standard Cessna 172 was impossible, so the plane was modified from top to bottom. Everything unnecessary inside was removed, and the weight was reduced. A small bed was added so the pilots could rest. A simple sink was installed for daily needs. In addition, a very basic autopilot system was integrated into the aircraft. But the real problem was fuel. Today, modern military aircraft are equipped with systems that allow them to refuel in the air. But back then, especially for such a small aircraft, such a system obviously did not exist. Besides, the Cessna 172 was not a large aircraft capable of flying at very high altitudes. So what were they going to do? The solution was once again extremely crazy. They said, we'll refuel from the ground with low-altitude flight without ever landing the plane. For this reason, an additional fuel tank that could be filled from the ground was added to the aircraft. Refueling took place over a straight road. The plane flew very low and a hose or rope was lowered from underneath it. On the ground, there was a pickup truck moving at a speed close to the aircraft. The workers in the back of the pickup truck would grab this hose, transfer fuel to the plane, and at the same time send food, water, and necessary supplies to the pilots. Just imagine. A plane is trying to stay in the air for weeks without landing, and it gets its fuel from a pickup truck passing underneath it. It sounds like a movie scene, but this really happened. Of course, no matter how much everything had been planned, the record did not come on the first attempt. There were exactly 4 attempts. In the first 3 attempts, different problems occurred in the aircraft. The longest of these attempts lasted 17 days, but even that was not even half of the 47-day record set in 1949. On top of that, another team was also working to break that 47-day record at the same time. And yes, they succeeded. The record was no longer 47 days. It had been raised to 50 days. So Robert Timm and his team's job had become one step even harder. Expecting a different result while trying the same methods did not make much sense. Something had to change now. Robert Timm needed a co-pilot who was at least as experienced as he was. But this person did not only need to know how to fly an airplane. If something broke during the flight, he also had to understand mechanics well enough to fix it while still in the air. That person was John Cook. John Cook was a very experienced aircraft mechanic, and considering that he accepted such a mission, it would not be very wrong to say that he was not exactly a normal man either. And finally, everything was ready for the fourth attempt. The date was December 4th, 1958. Robert Timm and John Cook took off from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. For the record to be considered valid, it had to be proven that the plane had not landed anywhere. So shortly after takeoff, they descended to a low altitude, and special marks were placed on the aircraft's wheels. This way, if the plane landed anywhere, it would be immediately noticed. There was no turning back now. The two men stayed in the air for days. But this flight was not a romantic and exciting adventure, as it may have seemed from the outside. On the contrary, it was extremely exhausting, boring, and at times dangerous. Things on the aircraft broke down frequently. Different parts failed, some systems stopped working, and the pilots spent most of their time fighting sleeplessness and fatigue inside a tiny cabin. But the most important thing continued to work. The engine. As long as the engine kept running and the plane could stay in the air, the mission would continue. Days passed. Weeks passed. They even entered the new year while still in the air. And finally, on the 50th day of the flight, the record was broken. Even if it was only by a few hours, they were now the crew that had stayed in the air the longest in the world. Robert Timm, John Cook, the Cessna 172, and of course the Hacienda Hotel had gone down in history. But that was not enough for them. Because breaking a record is one thing. Making sure that record cannot be easily broken again is something completely different. The record was now theirs, but the flight was still continuing. The year 1959 had arrived, and they were still in the air. Eventually, they said, "Since we've made it this far, let's take it as far as it goes." And that is exactly what they did. Before landing on February 7th, 1959, they managed to fly for another full 15 days. In total, they stayed in the air for 64 days, 22 hours, and 19 minutes. In other words, they did not touch the ground for more than 2 months. During this period, they flew approximately 150,000 miles. In kilometers, that is about 241,000 kilometers. To put it more clearly, with that distance, they could have traveled around the world approximately 6 times. And finally, on the 65th day of the flight, they decided to land. There's no clear information in the sources about whether this decision was caused by a major mechanical problem or whether the pilots had simply said, "That's enough." But you cannot help thinking this. After living inside a tiny airplane for more than 2 months, it would not be surprising at all if they had said, "Okay, that's enough now." In the end, the Hacienda Hotel had achieved its goal. It had both made its name known and carried out a campaign that went down in history. As for Robert Timm and John Cook, they gained a level of recognition in their aviation careers that they perhaps could not have achieved with anything else. But the most beautiful part of the story is this. This record still has not been broken even today. If you go to the airport in Las Vegas today, do not forget to look up at the ceiling when you reach the baggage claim area. Because the real hero of this incredible story, the Cessna 172, is still hanging there. And it is as if it is still saying, "I once did not land for 65 days.